Yeah, my name is Jay. I work at the sales office, also the director of sales for the Korean team. So I'm glad that you all could be here, and just like to offer you just what I know about the Korean services. First of all, I'd like to talk about the types of services. Basically, usually traditionally, Koreans, they like to have what's called evening service followed by a chapel service. So evening service will be the night, and then a regular chapel service, funeral service, and then they will have a graveside service. So technically, there's three services technically involved. But throughout the times, I think starting from about 4 years ago, there was less tendencies of people actually having evening services followed by the next day service and then the graveside. So now what happens is that they have an evening service followed by graveside service the following day. And even the evening services, there's a Korean term. It's called ikwan yebe. Okay, that's a Korean term. ikwan yebe. Basically, translation comes out as viewing service. That's what it means. Okay, ikwan yebe. So that consists of the evening service, and the following day, the chapel service and graveside service that you see here. And because about 3-4 years ago there's a decline, is because I think sometimes economically it can cost quite a bit. Because what happened is that usually Korean services, after a Korean service, like any service that you have usually is followed by a reception. And sometimes when you have a reception, usually it costs about $15 to about $20 a head for having such a reception. So because of that, usually when the service is done, they go to usually a restaurant. They usually don't go to someone's home. It's more formal manner for them to take them to the restaurant and have some kind of a meal. And because of that, you could imagine $15 to $20 a head. You have 100 people. Easily, you could run about $1,500 to about $2,000 easily just for one funeral service. So you have the evening service for the second part, evening service followed by the graveside service, or either traditional service that we have, the chapel service followed by a graveside service. Okay, and normally, but it does happen. I mean, rarely, you do have just a graveside service. Okay, which is the fourth one right there, but rarely done. And normally, the graveside service is usually done when they don't have that many family members, or they want to keep it as low-key as possible because certain event or something tragic that happened and they don't want a lot of people to know. Okay? So chapel services. Evening or funeral service are conducted the same day, same. Evening service tend to be a little bit longer and more people usually attend the evening service. Usually the services also start Monday to Friday. We start usually around 7 o'clock. Reason why 7 o'clock, because there's a lot of traffic, and because of that, it's just more meaningful just to have it 7 o'clock so people can attend for 7 o'clock service. Sometimes for Saturdays, Sundays though, you could have it either 5 or 6 because less traffic, and then there are not many people working on the weekends. During the services, as the service begins, there is what's called a reception table, checking in with guests. It's the family members, they decide who would be the receptionist. Usually there's 1 or 2 people. It's someone that they trust, usually a family member or close friends, or it can also be church members that they trust. And this part of this reception table is that when people come in, just like we have a regular a guest book, people will come in, also sign in their name, but also at the same time, there is a guest book that's also numbered, just like a wedding, in which that people, when they come in, they do give out envelopes, something like this. This is called kunjo. And basically what this envelope does is that it's just Koreans or even Chinese families, they like to put in money, but especially Koreans, they like to put in money in here as form of saying our condolences and any way that we could help out the family for these funeral services. This is what it's for. And there is a history behind this also. Basically the history is that Usually in Korea, the community actually got together. Anytime when a person passes away, the community got together, they gathered as much money possible, and they would give to the family. And that tradition still comes out today. And it basically is to also give honor to the loved one. Also at the same time, it also saves face for the family. The Koreans, there's something about saving face. And that's one thing as part of what this envelope and what giving money is, that you save face for the family. The next one, a chapel service, sitting. Usually the chapel sitting family usually sits at the front, right side if there is a center aisle facing the front. And usually pallbearers, they do not need to sit together. And usually for any chapel service setup, there is always an easel in front by the casket. Now, part of the Korean service, the officiant plays a big role in part of the service, because it's the officiant who does pretty much everything, presiding over the service. And sometimes for a service, sometimes even 3 to 4 pastors can be involved in one particular service for presiding, for praying, for the message, and for the benediction. And it really depends upon how well known the deceased was in the community, in the church. The officiant, it helps out in coordinating for the service details before the actual service. And the officiant also is the one who prints out all the programs, the folders. For any Korean service, you need to always have a program. And usually a church, depending on how big the church is, would depend upon that. They will usually have ushers also from, as soon as people come in, we'll pass out little programs, and then also sit them in to where they need to sit. And also, it's usually the ushers that will also have them in the procession of departing, that they will also lead and guide. The reason for having 3 to 4 pastors also as well is that, just say, for instance, if you have like 4 children in the family, each family member could be going to different churches. And part of that is that the church that you're going to, you need to represent it within your own family member also. And part of that also represents, okay, my pastor also will be in some way affiliated with helping out the services. That's the reason why we have 3 to 4 pastors in one service. The next part is the order of the service. The order of the service, it begins usually by the beginning prayer by the presider, and then we have the congregational hymnal singing, followed by the prayer by another pastor or elder, and then scripture reading, and then the message, and then a special song, usually by choir or a vocalist that either the family or the pastor has selected. Or even they have also at the simultaneously, you could also have a PowerPoint presentation also going on at the same time. Followed by a eulogy by family members or friends. And there's actually what's called a family acknowledgement announcements, where a family representative will come and say thank you, and also at the conclusion of the service, please join us for reception. They will say certain things like that. And then there's a final congregational hymnal, followed by the benediction by the pastor or presider. And then there's a parting view. Some services, depending on how reformed the denomination is, usually they have confession of faith or reading of the Apostles' Creed. So it becomes very more traditional in terms of depending upon the denomination. And especially the confession of faith or Apostles' Creed, that would be they recite, especially the Presbyterian or the Reformed would do this quite a bit. And part of the service, most of the time, keyboardist, most is always used, or I'll say 95% of the traditional services is used. A keyboard is always needed. The next is a parting view. People line up at the head of the casket in order by the next of kin, the spouse, children. And usually the officiant is also by near the foot end of the casket or by the podium. And the viewing usually starts at the rear of the chapel. And usually after the parting view, the family gathers once again to the casket to have their final viewing, and it usually ends with the pastor, officiant actually praying over the family. And then the casket is closed. In the recessional, is always the pastor, or sometimes the pastor could go with the photo bearer together, or the pastor and then the photo bearer, and the casket and the pallbearers, and then the immediate family members as they leave. And normally the photo bearer usually rides along with the service director. One thing as a service director, you make sure that the passenger side, that make sure that it is clean, the car is turned on, and the air conditioning working, especially on summer days. And usually the photo bearer is usually the eldest son or the oldest grandson. And then at the graveside, you have the processional again. You have the photo at the front. And then you have the traditional, you have the same order as the regular service that took place, but this time the graveside service is a little bit shorter, okay? And you have the service, which consists of the opening prayer. You have the congregational hymnal singing again. You have the scripture reading, the message, the hymnal, and the benediction. So some of the stuff is still lengthy, but not as lengthy as a regular service that you take place, okay? And then normally they always have a floral tribute. And then it really depends upon the family. Some families, they do have witness backfill complete, but not all families will do this. Okay, and I see more of a frequency in which that families are not doing the witness backfill as much as they used to, because one thing is also the pastors are now telling the families it's really not necessary to do so, because it can be a little bit more traumatic on the family. Regarding the flowers. The flower arrangements is arranged in order of the next of kins and the status of the family tree, or importance of the community that you're in. So this is talking about when you actually place the flowers around the chapel, and sometimes flowers you could have as much as I think about even 100 flowers has come in one time, depending how well respected you are in the community. But usually there's about at least 3 or 4 to about 100 flowers that could come in potentially. Okay, and also Koreans, what they like to do is they like to have the ribbons to be cut, and most of the time the ribbons are cut from the left side. But what I've seen now more and more frequently is that now even the people that makes the flowers, that the ribbons, it comes in either both ways. So I would recommend just cutting both sides at all, so that you have no errors regarding that. Okay, and that's one thing also to recommend to our service directors, is that sometimes what I've seen, especially during evening services, is that if you just say there's an evening service followed by the graveside service, those flowers will either be placed at the chapel, and then later on when everything is done, it will be brought back to the mortuary side. It is recommended that basically when we cut the ribbons, that is done not in front of the family. The miscellaneous for the reception, gathering after a funeral service, customary to provide for guests. Either going to a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant, usually the restaurant will provide business cards. And basically, on the business card, you stamp or you initial, so that you will know that whatever from your party, that basically that person will give to the restaurant people, and then they keep hold of all the cards. So they will differentiate who belongs to who, because sometimes there could be two funeral parties in the same restaurant. And also sometimes what happens is that this is happening more and more, in which after service is done, also a family, especially during evening services, they will provide rice cakes, usually rice cakes that will be provided to the families as well during the evening time. Now this is regarding funeral attire. All evening funeral graveside services, it is customary for everyone to wear black or dark colored suit or clothing. Okay, for men, traditionally, they wear black or dark ties, and women to wear black, dark dress. Why the significance of that? It basically is to demonstrate the mourning and the sympathy. Right? That's the reason why. And if people do wear different besides something light colored, even though people will not say, but then in their minds and their thinking is like, very uneducated, very unmannered. They would think that way. Okay, so it's always a must when you go to funeral services. Always wear something dark and very something wearing a suit. That's preferred. Also for the funeral attire, the second part. All evening services, funeral service. Okay, why not bright colors? Because bright colors also signify celebration and festivities. And part of the grieving process, you just need to have that grieving process to move on. Unless the family actually says, please dress up in a different manner. And that's probably more, I'll say more second generation mindset. But usually the traditional first generation, 1.5 generation is that you have to dress in a conservative manner. And usually the deceased, for the clothing that they wear, is called hanbok. Hanbok, that's what's the name of the Korean. It's called hanbok. And usually the hanbok is usually worn, usually when people get married, there is a formal ceremony in which that you work together, and there's a family traditional bowing procedure that they all go through. And part of that is that since you got married, why not also, as you rest in peace, you wear that traditional costume. Sometimes people would cry, and sometimes cry more exaggerated. Reason for that is not that, of course, they do grieve, but the fact that the more that you cry, it represents how faithful you are or you were as a child. In the Korean tradition also, there is what's called a 3-day, 5-day, and 7-day funeral. In Korea, you have to pretty much have like a 3-day funeral services. They still do that in Korea, but why 3, 5 days, 3, 5, 7? Basically, these are considered the good days or lucky numbers for them to have burials or service times. Again, just traditions like odd numbers, loosely tied to good luck and fortune. And anything about number 4, in Korean custom, number 4 is a bad number, is a bad luck number. Did anybody know that? Just like, for us here, 13 is a bad number, right? Bad luck number. For the Koreans, number 4 is bad. And also, if you have seen Koreans, what they have seen is that people usually bow. We bow because as form of showing respect. Okay, and also when we shake hands. Normally when we shake hands, we just shake just one hand like this, right? But even with that, there is a proper mannerism when you also shake hands. You don't just shake your hand like if a person comes here like this and shaking your hand. There is a proper manner of as you're holding your arm in this position or in this position, and that you will shake your hand in a manly form, because basically just doing it with one hand is not really showing true mannerism of what you're supposed to do. Okay, so that's something in which that Koreans got to be accustomed to. So when you bow also, I don't know if you have seen Koreans bow before, but a proper bowing would be like this and bowing like this with your eyes actually not facing them, but then just facing down like this. That would be a proper manner of also when you bow. Okay, shaking hands again would be a better form of doing it like this. Okay. It's like showing there's a little support of your arm and then shaking hand. Well, thank you very much.